The owner let out a short breath, almost like a laugh, but there was no humor in it. Safe, he echoed. So tell me, was I making someone unsafe? Was I doing anything suspicious? Or did you just decide, the second I walked in, that I wasn't supposed to be here? The manager's mouth opened, then closed. He knew there was no good answer to that. He had been caught. Meanwhile, back on the sales floor, the employees whispered among themselves. Some of them had worked under this manager for months, even years, and now they were starting to question everything. If he could treat the owner of the company this way, how had he been treating regular customers? Had they ignored warning signs? A young cashier, who had seen the whole thing unfold, nervously turned to an older employee. "Do you think he's gonna get fired?" she asked in a hushed voice. The older worker sighed. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I think he's about to learn a lesson he won't forget." Back in the stockroom, the owner crossed his arms, waiting for an answer. The manager shifted on his feet, searching for a way out of this mess. But deep down he knew there was no way to talk his way out of this one. The manager's throat felt dry as he struggled to find the right words. His mind raced, searching for an excuse, a way to explain himself that didn't make him look worse. But there was nothing. The truth was painfully clear. He had made a snap judgment, and now he was facing the consequences. The owner took a step closer, lowering his voice, but making every word hit even harder. "Do you have any idea who I am? What I've built?" His tone wasn't angry, but it carried a weight that made the manager's stomach twist. The manager swallowed hard. I didn't mean any harm," he said quickly. "It was just a misunderstanding." The owner shook his head, his disappointment evident. "A misunderstanding," he repeated. "Let me ask you something. How many times have you misunderstood someone else? How many customers have walked through these doors and been treated the same way just because you assumed the worst about them?" The manager's face turned red. He had no idea how to answer that. Meanwhile, out on the sales floor, the tension was still thick. Employees glanced toward the back of the store, waiting, wondering. A few customers had caught on that something big was happening. Some had even pulled out their phones, whispering to each other as they tried to piece together what was going on. One of the senior employees, a woman who had worked at the store for years, shook her head as she quietly spoke to another worker. "I always knew he was strict, but I never thought he'd take it this far," she muttered. "I mean, calling the police? On the guy who signs his paycheck." The other employee nodded. "He's in deep trouble," he whispered back. "I bet he's already packing up his stuff." Back in the stockroom, the manager's hands were clenched at his sides. His confidence, his authority, everything had crumbled in a matter of minutes. "Look," he finally said, his voice quieter now, almost desperate. "I made a mistake, I know that. But are you really going to fire me over this?" The owner studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he exhaled. "You still don't get it, do you?" he said. And with that, he reached into his pocket, pulling out something that made the manager's stomach drop. This was it, the moment everything changed. The manager's breath hitched as his eyes locked onto the item in the owner's hand. It wasn't a termination notice. It wasn't even his phone, ready to call corporate and end his career. It was something much worse, a small black notebook. The kind used for taking notes, tracking details, keeping records. The owner flipped it open, slowly turning the pages. "You know what this is?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. The manager's face paled. He had a bad feeling about this. I don't know," he stammered. The owner tapped a page with his finger before turning it around for the manager to see. "It's a log," he said. "I like to check in on different locations, see how things are running. And this store, it's had complaints. A lot of them." The manager's stomach twisted. He glanced at the notebook, scanning over notes written in neat, precise handwriting. Each entry detailed customer experiences, reports of being followed, watched too closely, questioned unfairly. Some employees had even spoken up about the way certain people were treated differently the moment they walked through the doors. And now standing here, the manager realized just how deep the problem ran. The owner's voice broke through his thoughts. This isn't just about today. You didn't just make one bad call, you made a habit out of it. His eyes locked onto the manager, and for the first time, there was no trace of patience left. And you thought no one would notice. The manager's hands started to shake. He had been so sure of his control, of his authority over this store, but now he was realizing he had been under a microscope for a long time. Meanwhile, out on the sales floor, the employees whispered anxiously. A few glanced at each other, as if debating whether to step forward. Some of them had their own stories, times they had been uncomfortable with the way their boss handled certain situations. But no one had spoken up before. Maybe, just maybe, that was about to change. Back in the stockroom, the air felt heavy. The owner took a step forward, his voice dropping lower. "Tell me, why should I keep you here?" The manager had no answer, because for the first time he knew this wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a reckoning. The manager stood frozen, his pulse pounding in his ears. The weight of everything, the accusations, the logbook, the owner's words, was crushing him. He had spent so long controlling this store, making the rules, deciding who belonged and who didn't. And now, in a single moment, all of that power was gone. He took a shaky breath, eyes darting around like he was searching for a way out. "Sir, please," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can change. I need another chance." The owner studied him for a long moment, unreadable as ever. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then, with a slow shake of his head, he spoke. "I don't think you understand," he said. "This isn't just about second chances. It's about trust." The manager swallowed hard, gripping the edge of a nearby shelf as if it could steady him. "I can earn it back," he said quickly. "I swear, I'll do better." The owner sighed, but before he could respond, a voice from behind them spoke up. "I don't think he should stay." Both men turned to see one of the employees standing in the doorway, hands clenched at her sides. She looked nervous but determined, and she wasn't alone. Behind her, several other employees had gathered, all watching the scene unfold. The young cashier, the one who had been whispering earlier, stepped forward. "We've seen how he treats people," she said, her voice steady despite the tension. "Customers, employees, it's not just today." Another worker nodded. "We didn't say anything before, but maybe we should have." The manager's face twisted in shock, his own employees, turning on him. He opened his mouth, ready to defend himself, but nothing came out. The owner took a deep breath, then turned back to the manager. "You heard them," he said. "You've built an environment where people are afraid to speak up. That ends today." The manager knew it was over. He let out a slow breath, shoulders slumping in defeat. "So that's it," he muttered. "I'm done." The owner met his eyes. "No," he said. "You were done the second you decided some people didn't belong here." And just like that, the decision was made. The manager was out. But as he grabbed his things and walked past the employees, now standing together, stronger than before, there was one last surprise waiting for him. Because just as he reached the door, a new figure stepped inside. Someone he hadn't seen before, someone wearing a corporate badge. And the moment their eyes met, the manager realized his troubles were far from over. The manager stopped in his tracks, his heart pounding as he took in the corporate badge clipped onto the stranger's shirt. He had barely processed what just happened, and now this? He opened his mouth to speak, but the corporate representative didn't even look at him. Instead, they turned to the owner. "We got your report," they said. "We need to have a conversation about some of the policies, or lack of them, being enforced here." The manager felt a cold chill run down his spine. It wasn't just about him anymore. His choices had put the entire store under scrutiny. He clenched his fists, staring at the ground. Then, without another word, he pushed past the group and walked out the door. The employee stood in stunned silence as the realization settled in. he was really gone. Imagine walking into a store, just minding your business, ready to shop, when suddenly you're treated like a criminal. No reason, no explanation, just instant judgment. That's exactly what happened to one man when a store manager took one look at him and decided he didn't belong. But what happened next? Oh, the manager never saw it coming. It started like any normal day. A well-dressed man walked into a popular retail store, ready to check on how things were running. But before he could even get past the first aisle, the store manager stormed over, eyes full of suspicion. "Can I help you with something?" The tone wasn't friendly, it was full of assumption, like he had already decided this man wasn't supposed to be there. The man, calm and polite, simply said he was looking around. But the manager wasn't having it. He followed closely, watching every move, making it obvious he thought something was off. A few minutes later, the situation escalated. The manager whispered to an employee, then reached for the phone. Moments later, sirens blared outside. The police had arrived. At this point, most people would panic, right? But not this man. Instead of getting angry, instead of arguing, he just stood there, calm, collected, and almost amused. The officers walked in, ready for confrontation, but what they found left them speechless. The store manager, now standing tall like he had just done the right thing, pointed straight at the man. "That's him," he said with confidence. But then, just as the officers turned to question him, the man finally spoke up. And what he said changed everything. Because you see, this wasn't just any customer. This was the owner, not just of this store, but of the entire chain. And in that moment, the store manager realized he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. So, what happened next? Did he get fired on the spot? Did the owner give him a second chance? Oh, trust me, you want to stick around for this one. Because the way this story ends, it's something no one expected. The store fell silent. The employees, the customers, everyone froze as they processed what had just happened. The man who had been treated like a suspicious outsider was actually the one in charge. Not just of this store, but of every single location in the entire company. And now all eyes were on him. The store manager's confidence started to crack. His face paled as he realized his mistake. He had assumed, he had judged, and now he was standing face to face with the person who had the power to decide his future. The owner looked at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then finally he spoke. "So, you thought I didn't belong here?" His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, something sharp, something controlled. The manager swallowed hard. I was just trying to make sure everything was safe," he stammered. But it was clear the excuse wasn't holding up. The employees behind him shifted uncomfortably, suddenly realizing how bad this looked. One of the officers, still standing near the door, cleared his throat. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, glancing between the two men. He had walked in expecting to handle a shoplifting complaint, not this. The owner took a deep breath. He wasn't the type to cause a scene, but this wasn't something he could just ignore. He had worked for years to build this business from the ground up. He had hired managers like this one, trusting them to treat customers with respect. And yet, here he was, being treated like a trespasser in his own store. He turned to the officer and nodded. "Yeah, I think we're good." The manager let out a small breath, as if he thought he was in the clear. But the owner wasn't finished. "Actually," he said, looking back at him, "I think we need to have a little talk." The manager's face dropped. He knew what was coming. And as the owner gestured for him to step aside, everyone else in the store watched in silence, waiting to see just how bad this was going to get. The store manager hesitated, his feet feeling heavier with each step as he followed the owner toward the back of the store. The murmurs of employees and customers filled the air, but no one dared to say anything loud enough for the owner to hear. The tension was thick, and everyone knew this wasn't going to end well for the manager. They stopped near the stockroom, away from prying eyes but not out of earshot. The owner turned around slowly, his face calm but unreadable. The manager forced a nervous smile. Sir, I didn't know who you were, he started, his voice shaky. I was just doing my job. The owner tilted his head slightly, his expression unwavering. Your job, he repeated. Tell me, what exactly do you think your job is? The manager hesitated. To, run the store, keep things in order, and make sure customers feel safe, he said quickly, as if reciting from a handbook. The young cashier let out a small breath, almost as if she had been holding it in the entire time. I can't believe it just happened, she whispered. The senior employee nodded slowly. It needed to, she said, for a long time. The owner turned to the group, his expression softer now. I know this wasn't easy, he said, but you all stood up for what was right today. That matters. One of the employees hesitated before speaking. Is the store in trouble? The owner gave a small smile. No, he assured them, but things are going to change. Better policies, better leadership, and that starts now. For the first time in a long time, the atmosphere in the store felt different, lighter. The fear that had lingered under the previous manager's rule was gone. In its place was something else, hope. As the owner made his way toward the front, he took one last glance at the door the manager had walked through. A lesson had been learned that day, not just by one man, but by everyone watching. Because in the end, respect isn't just about rules or authority. It's about the way you treat people, no matter who they are. And that's what truly decides who belongs.